Candace Martinez, a 42-year-old environmental science teacher and devoted mother to 16-year-old Emma, thought her biggest worry was helping her daughter choose the right college major. Then Richard Harrison knocked on her door at 7:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, demanding she remove the 3 heritage oak trees she'd lovingly planted and nurtured for 17 years. What happened next will make you question everything you know about your own neighborhood's power structures. Before you hear this story, ask yourself, do you really know what your HOA can and cannot force you to do to your property? This happened just 8 months ago in Willowbrook Estates, a planned community outside Phoenix, Arizona. The family involved, they're still living there, and those trees are still standing. But the journey to that victory will change how you look at every HOA letter in your mailbox. Candace had moved to Willowbrook Estates in 2007, a young single mother, scraping together every penny for the down payment on a modest 3-bedroom ranch home. The neighborhood was only 2 years old then, still rough around the edges with half-finished landscaping and the smell of new construction lingering in the desert air. The HOA rules were simple: maintain your property, keep noise levels reasonable, and follow basic architectural guidelines for any major modifications. Nothing mentioned trees specifically, except a vague requirement for desert-appropriate landscaping. As an environmental science teacher at nearby Desert Ridge High School, Candace understood the critical importance of trees in the Phoenix climate. Urban heat islands were becoming more severe each year, and mature trees could drop surrounding temperatures by up to 20 degrees. When Emma was just 2 years old, toddling around their bare backyard in the scorching Arizona sun, Candace made a decision that would define the next 2 decades of their lives. She researched extensively, consulting with local arborists and checking city regulations. Heritage oaks, while not native to the Sonoran Desert, were approved by the city for residential planting. Because of their exceptional heat tolerance and relatively low water requirements once established, the species had been successfully cultivated in Phoenix for over 50 years. Most importantly for a single mother on a teacher's salary, young heritage oak saplings cost only $35 each at the local nursery. On a crisp October morning in 2007, Candace planted 3 small heritage oak saplings along her back property line. Emma helped, her tiny hands covered in potting soil as she carefully patted dirt around the fragile stems. The trees were barely 3 feet tall, their leaves already adapting to the intense desert sun. Candace installed a drip irrigation system, spending her weekends nurturing what she hoped would become a natural cooling canopy for her daughter's childhood. The HOA never said a word. In fact, during those early years, Candace received several compliments from neighbors about her beautiful landscaping. Mrs. Chen, the retired librarian who lived next door, often commented on how the shade from the growing trees helped cool her own backyard. The HOA president at the time, a friendly retiree named Frank Morrison, actually used Candace's yard as a positive example during the annual homeowners meeting, praising residents who took initiative to beautify the community. Years passed peacefully. The trees grew slowly but steadily, as heritage oaks do, developing thick trunks and spreading branches that created increasingly valuable shade. Emma grew up playing beneath their canopy, doing homework on summer evenings in the cool relief they provided. Candace's utility bills remained manageable even as Phoenix temperatures soared, thanks largely to the natural air conditioning her trees provided. In 2015, Frank Morrison moved to assisted living, and the HOA presidency fell to Richard Harrison, a recently retired bank manager who had moved to Willowbrook Estates just 3 years earlier. Dick, as he insisted everyone call him, brought a very different management philosophy to the position. Where Frank had been collaborative and community-minded, Dick was rigid and controlling. He began his tenure by announcing a comprehensive review of all community standards and violations. Initially, this review focused on obvious issues: peeling paint, broken mailboxes, and overgrown desert landscaping that violated the community's water conservation requirements. Most residents appreciated the attention to maintaining property values. But as months passed, Dick's scrutiny became increasingly arbitrary and punitive. He began citing residents for violations that had existed for years without complaint, claiming that previous enforcement had been too lenient. The first sign of trouble came in spring 2018 when Candace received a letter questioning her non-conforming vegetation. The letter was vague, referencing a newly interpreted reading of the original CC&Rs that emphasized desert-appropriate landscaping. Candace was confused. Her trees had been there for 11 years without any complaints. She attended the next HOA meeting to seek clarification. Dick's response was dismissive and condescending. He explained that, while her trees might have been overlooked in the past, the current board was committed to proper enforcement of community standards. He suggested she begin transitioning her landscaping to more appropriate desert plants. When Candace pointed out that her trees were city-approved and had been established for over a decade, Dick simply stated that HOA rules took precedence over city guidelines. Margaret Chen, now 73 and still sharp as ever, stood up during that meeting to defend Candace. As the neighborhood's unofficial historian, Margaret remembered clearly the original landscaping discussions from the community's founding. She had kept meticulous records of all HOA meetings and communications, a habit developed during her 40-year career as a librarian. According to Margaret's documentation, there had been no specific prohibition of non-native trees, only a general preference for water-wise landscaping. Dick dismissed Margaret's records as incomplete and not reflective of the board's current interpretation. This response troubled several longtime residents, who began to sense that Dick's vision for the community differed significantly from the collaborative spirit that had originally attracted them to Willowbrook Estates. For the next year, the issue simmered beneath the surface. Candace received periodic letters reminding her about the landscaping concerns, but no formal violations were issued. She hoped the matter would fade away, especially as new residents moved in, and actual violations requiring attention emerged throughout the community. But Dick Harrison was not a man who let things fade away. His retirement from banking had left him without the daily authority he had wielded for 30 years as a branch manager. The HOA presidency filled that void, giving him a sphere of influence where his decisions carried weight and consequences. In his mind, allowing any deviation from his interpretation of the rules would signal weakness and invite chaos. The situation escalated dramatically in February 2024. Candace's trees, now 17 years old, had reached magnificent maturity. Their trunks measured nearly 3 feet in diameter, their canopies spreading 40 feet across. They provided shade for not just Candace's property, but also offered cooling relief to neighboring yards. The trees had become a beloved fixture of the neighborhood, a gathering place where children played and adults enjoyed evening conversations. That's when Dick made his move. On February 15, 2024, Candace found a certified letter in her mailbox. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed for it, sensing that whatever it contained would change everything. The formal violation notice was 3 pages long, filled with legal language and references to specific CC&R sections she had never seen enforced before. The letter demanded immediate removal of all 3 heritage oak trees, citing them as non-compliant vegetation that violated the community's landscaping standards. She was given 30 days to complete the removal or face escalating fines beginning at $200 per day per tree. The letter also referenced potential legal action and liens against her property if she failed to comply. Candace sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter while Emma finished her homework nearby. The numbers were staggering. Professional tree removal for mature oaks would cost at least $5,000 per tree, $15,000 total. The daily fines would add up to $600 per day if she failed to comply. On a teacher's salary, these amounts were financially catastrophic. But the money wasn't even the primary concern. These trees represented 17 years of careful nurturing, environmental stewardship, and family memories. Emma had grown up beneath their branches. They had reduced Candace's cooling costs, improved air quality, prevented soil erosion, and provided habitat for local wildlife. Their removal would eliminate decades of environmental benefits and leave her backyard exposed to the brutal Phoenix sun. That evening, Candace called her neighbor Margaret Chen. Margaret was furious about the violation notice, viewing it as an attack on the community's historical integrity and collaborative values. She immediately began researching the original CC&Rs and gathering documentation about the tree's long-standing presence in the community. Margaret's research revealed several crucial facts. First, the original 2005 CC&Rs contained no specific prohibition of heritage oaks or other city-approved tree species. Second, the landscaping guidelines had been deliberately kept general to allow for individual creativity and adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Third, multiple board meetings from 2007 through 2015 contained references to encouraging residents to plant shade trees for energy conservation. Most importantly, Margaret discovered that Arizona state law included specific Protections for established landscaping through grandfathering provisions. Property improvements that had existed for more than 10 years with the knowledge of the HOA, and without formal objection, generally could not be retroactively deemed violations. Armed with this information, Candace requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. Under the community's governance documents, homeowners had the right to present their case before any fines were imposed. Candace spent hours preparing her presentation, gathering photographs showing the tree's growth over 17 years, utility bills demonstrating energy savings, and research about their environmental benefits. The hearing was held on March 20, 2024, in the Community Center meeting room. Dick Harrison presided, flanked by 4 other board members: Linda Peterson, the secretary, who had served alongside Dick for 6 years, James Rodriguez, a software engineer who had reluctantly joined the board the previous year, Patricia Williams, a retiree who generally deferred to Dick's leadership, and Robert Kim, a quiet accountant who rarely spoke during meetings. Candace presented her case methodically, drawing on her experience as a teacher to make complex concepts accessible. She explained the tree's history, their environmental benefits, and the legal concept of grandfathering that should protect established landscaping. She showed photographs of Emma growing up beneath the trees, neighbors enjoying their shade, and local wildlife that had made homes in their branches. Margaret Chen spoke next, presenting her meticulously documented research about the community's original landscaping guidelines and the tree's long-standing acceptance by previous boards. She pointed out that retroactive enforcement violated basic principles of fair governance and could set a dangerous precedent for other established property improvements throughout the community. Dick's response was swift and dismissive. He argued that the current board had the authority to interpret and enforce community standards as they saw fit. Previous boards had been negligent in their oversight, but that didn't prevent proper enforcement now. He emphasized his commitment to uniform standards and property values, claiming that allowing exceptions would lead to community deterioration. James Rodriguez asked several thoughtful questions about the grandfathering principles Margaret had presented. As someone with a background in software development, he understood the importance of consistent rule interpretation and documentation. Dick's arbitrary enforcement approach troubled him, especially given the significant financial impact on Candace and her family. Linda Peterson supported Dick's position, arguing that homeowners knew the rules when they moved in and should be prepared to comply regardless of previous enforcement patterns. Her loyalty to Dick was absolute, based on years of working together to maintain what they viewed as proper community standards. The hearing concluded with no immediate decision. The board announced they would deliberate and provide their ruling within 10 days. Candace left feeling frustrated but not defeated. She had presented strong arguments, and James Rodriguez's questions suggested at least one board member was taking her concerns seriously. During the 10-day waiting period, something unexpected happened. Other residents began rallying to Candace's support. Many neighbors had received the violation notice and were troubled by its aggressive tone and arbitrary nature. They began sharing their own experiences with Dick's increasingly rigid enforcement approach. Tom and Susan Fletcher, who lived 3 houses down, revealed they had received citations for a decorative fountain that had been installed 12 years earlier. The Hendersons were told their front yard sculpture, a beloved piece created by their late son, now violated artistic display guidelines. The Patel family faced demands to remove a vegetable garden they had maintained for 8 years, despite its obvious environmental benefits and compliance with city ordinances. A pattern emerged of selective, retroactive enforcement targeting established property improvements that had previously been accepted by the community. Dick seemed to be systematically eliminating anything that didn't fit his narrow vision of suburban conformity. Margaret Chen organized informal coffee meetings where residents could share their experiences and discuss collective responses. These gatherings revealed the depth of frustration with Dick's authoritarian approach. Many homeowners felt their community was becoming a place of fear rather than neighborhood pride. On March 30, the board announced their decision. Despite James Rodriguez's objections, they voted 4-1 to uphold the violation notice. Candace had 30 days to remove the trees or face escalating daily fines. The decision letter was even more aggressive than the original violation, threatening legal action and property liens if she failed to comply immediately. That night, Candace made one of the most difficult decisions of her life. She would fight, not just for her trees, but for the principle that homeowners deserved fair treatment and protection from arbitrary rule enforcement. She couldn't afford to lose her home to HOA liens, but she also couldn't allow Dick Harrison to destroy 17 years of environmental stewardship without a proper legal challenge. The next morning, Candace contacted Sarah Roberts, an environmental law attorney who specialized in property rights cases. Sarah had handled several HOA disputes involving landscaping and environmental issues. During their initial consultation, Sarah was immediately interested in Candace's case, seeing it as a clear example of improper retroactive enforcement. Sarah explained that Arizona law provided several potential protections for Candace's situation. The state's grandfathering statutes were designed specifically to prevent HOAs from arbitrarily targeting established property improvements. Additionally, environmental protection laws gave special consideration to mature trees and established landscaping that provided ecological benefits. The legal strategy would be multifaceted. First, they would challenge the violation based on grandfathering principles, arguing that 17 years of acceptance by the HOA created legal protection for the trees. Second, they would question the board's authority to retroactively reinterpret existing rules without proper community input. Third, they would present evidence of the tree's environmental benefits and compliance with city regulations. Sarah also recommended documenting any evidence of selective enforcement or personal bias in Dick's decision-making. If they could demonstrate that the violation was motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate community standards, it would significantly strengthen their case. Filing the legal challenge required a retainer of $3,000. Money Candace could barely afford on her teacher's salary. Emma, now a senior in high school, offered to withdraw her college savings to help with legal costs. The gesture broke Candace's heart, but also strengthened her resolve. This fight had become about more than trees. It was about protecting her daughter's future and the values they had built their lives around. As April progressed, the daily fines began accumulating. $600 per day added up quickly, creating a mounting financial burden that kept Candace awake at night. Sarah filed for a temporary restraining order to halt the fines during litigation, but Dick opposed the motion aggressively, arguing that delaying enforcement would undermine community standards. The community became increasingly polarized. Dick's supporters, primarily newer residents who appreciated his strict enforcement approach, viewed Candace as a troublemaker who refused to follow established rules. They argued that allowing her trees would set a precedent encouraging other rule violations throughout the neighborhood. But Candace's supporters, many of whom were original residents like Margaret Chen, saw the case as a fundamental test of community values. They organized petition drives, attended board meetings in large numbers, and began questioning other aspects of Dick's leadership that had previously gone unchallenged. James Rodriguez found himself caught in the middle of this community division. His software development background made him appreciate consistent rule interpretation, but his research into the legal issues convinced him that Dick's approach was both unfair and potentially illegal. During a heated board meeting in late April, James publicly stated his opposition to the tree removal demand, citing concerns about grandfathering laws and selective enforcement. Dick's response was swift and personal. He accused James of being influenced by neighborhood politics rather than focusing on his fiduciary duty to maintain community standards. The confrontation revealed Dick's inability to accept disagreement or compromise, traits that were becoming increasingly problematic for effective community governance. In May, Sarah Roberts discovered a crucial piece of evidence. While reviewing historical board meeting minutes, she found a 2010 discussion where Dick himself had praised residents who planted shade trees for energy conservation. The minutes showed Dick specifically mentioning that such environmental initiatives helped maintain property values and demonstrated community leadership. This discovery was devastating for Dick's position. It proved that he had previously endorsed exactly the type of landscaping he was now trying to eliminate. Sarah immediately filed a motion to include this evidence in their case, arguing that it demonstrated both the validity of grandfathering protections and the arbitrary nature of current enforcement. The community impact of the legal battle extended far beyond Candace's property. Other residents began questioning their own vulnerability to retroactive enforcement. Home sales slowed as potential buyers worried about unpredictable HOA actions. The community's reputation in the broader Phoenix area began suffering as word spread about the arbitrary tree removal demands. Local media picked up the story in June, drawn by the dramatic conflict between environmental protection and HOA authority. A Channel 12 news segment featured interviews with Candace, Margaret Chen, and several other affected residents. The coverage portrayed Dick as an inflexible authoritarian who was damaging community cohesion for personal control. Dick's response to media attention was characteristically defensive and aggressive. He refused interviews but issued a written statement claiming that media coverage was biased and failed to understand the complexities of community governance. He accused Candace of using publicity to avoid following legitimate rules that applied to all residents. But the media attention had consequences Dick hadn't anticipated. Environmental groups began taking interest in the case, viewing it as an example of how HOA policies could undermine urban forestry and climate adaptation efforts. The Arizona Urban Forest Coalition offered to provide expert witnesses supporting the tree's environmental value. Dr. Michael Torres, a professor of environmental science at Arizona State University, agreed to testify about the ecological benefits of mature heritage oaks in desert climates. His research demonstrated that Candace's 3 trees removed approximately 12 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere annually, provided cooling equivalent to 5 tons of air conditioning, and prevented significant soil erosion during Phoenix's intense monsoon seasons. The environmental expert testimony would be crucial for demonstrating that the trees provided legitimate community benefits that justified their protection under Arizona's environmental statutes. Sarah Roberts was building a comprehensive case that combined legal precedent, environmental science, and community impact evidence. As summer approached, the financial pressure on Candace intensified. The daily fines had accumulated to over $40,000, an amount that threatened her ability to maintain mortgage payments. The stress was affecting her teaching performance, and Emma was struggling with anxiety about potentially losing their home. Margaret Chen organized a neighborhood fundraising effort to help with legal costs, but Candace was reluctant to accept charity from neighbors who faced their own financial challenges. The situation had become a test of community solidarity versus individual responsibility, with residents forced to choose between supporting their neighbor and avoiding conflict with HOA leadership. In July, Dick made a strategic error that would ultimately doom his case. Frustrated by the continuing legal challenge and media attention, he sent a personal letter to Candace that went beyond official HOA business. The letter accused her of being a disruptive influence who was damaging community harmony and suggested she should consider moving if she couldn't accept established community standards. Sarah Roberts immediately recognized the letter as evidence of personal bias and harassment. It demonstrated that Dick's actions were motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate community governance concerns. The letter became a centerpiece of their legal strategy, proving that the tree removal demand was retaliatory rather than based on consistent rule enforcement. The case finally reached formal legal proceedings in August 2024. The hearing was held in Maricopa County Superior Court, with Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Both sides presented comprehensive arguments about HOA authority, grandfathering protections, and environmental considerations. Sarah Roberts methodically presented evidence of the tree's 17-year history, Dick's previous endorsement of shade tree planting, the arbitrary nature of current enforcement, and the environmental benefits that justified legal protection. She called Margaret Chen to testify about community history, Dr. Torres to explain ecological benefits, and several neighbors to describe the tree's positive impact on the neighborhood. Dick's attorney focused on HOA authority to interpret and enforce community standards. They argued that previous enforcement failures didn't prevent current compliance requirements, and that allowing exceptions would undermine the association's ability to maintain property values and community aesthetics. But under cross-examination, Dick's position crumbled. When questioned about his 2010 comments endorsing shade tree planting, he became defensive and contradictory. His testimony revealed a pattern of selective enforcement based on personal preferences rather than consistent community standards. Most damaging was his inability to explain why the trees had suddenly become violations after 17 years of acceptance. Judge Morrison's decision was swift and comprehensive. She ruled that Arizona's grandfathering statutes clearly protected established landscaping that had existed for more than 10 years with HOA knowledge. The 17-year history of the trees, combined with previous board endorsement, created legal protection that couldn't be retroactively eliminated. More importantly, the judge found evidence of selective enforcement and personal bias that violated basic principles of fair governance. She ordered immediate cessation of all fines related to the trees, refund of penalties already collected, and payment of Candace's legal costs by the HOA. The victory was complete, but it came with personal costs that would take time to heal. The community had been fractured by months of conflict, and trust between neighbors would require careful rebuilding. Candace had emerged stronger and more confident, but also more aware of how fragile community cooperation could be. Dick Harrison resigned from the HOA presidency within days of the court decision. His authoritarian approach had not only failed legally but had damaged his reputation and relationships throughout the community. Linda Peterson also stepped down, unable to continue serving after the comprehensive rejection of their leadership approach. James Rodriguez was elected as interim president, bringing a collaborative leadership style that emphasized communication and consensus building. His first official act was establishing a community healing process that would address the conflicts and mistrust generated by the tree removal controversy. Emma Martinez, inspired by her mother's fight for environmental protection and community values, decided to major in environmental law when she started college that fall. The experience had shown her how individual courage could create broader change and how legal advocacy could protect both environmental resources and community democracy. The heritage oak trees continue to thrive, their canopy spreading wider each year as they approach their 20th anniversary in Candace's backyard. They provide cooling shade for summer gatherings, habitat for local wildlife, and a living reminder of what can be achieved when community members stand up for their values. Margaret Chen, now 74, has become the neighborhood's unofficial advisor on HOA governance and conflict resolution. Her meticulous documentation during the tree controversy demonstrated the importance of community memory and historical awareness in protecting residents' rights. The Willowbrook Estates community has emerged stronger from the conflict, with new governance procedures that emphasize transparency, consistency, and respect for established property improvements. The tree controversy became a catalyst for broader reforms that protect all residents from arbitrary enforcement and personal bias. Sarah Roberts continues practicing environmental law with renewed passion for protecting urban forestry and homeowner rights. The Martinez case became a precedent for other Arizona communities facing similar conflicts between HOA authority and environmental protection. Candace has returned to her quiet life as a teacher and mother, but she carries herself with new confidence and awareness of her own strength. The experience taught her that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, and that protecting what matters most requires courage she didn't know she possessed. On warm Arizona evenings when the desert air finally cools and the heritage oaks provide blessed shade, neighbors still gather in Candace's backyard to share stories and strengthen community bonds. The trees that once threatened to divide the neighborhood have become symbols of what can be achieved when people stand together for fairness, environmental stewardship, and human dignity. The victory wasn't just about saving 3 trees. It was about protecting the principle that communities thrive when they balance individual rights with collective responsibilities, when they honor their history while adapting to changing needs, and when they choose collaboration over control. Most importantly, it proved that ordinary people, when pushed too far, can find extraordinary strength to fight for what matters most. Today, those heritage oaks stand 45 feet tall, their branches reaching toward the Arizona sky like victory banners celebrating the power of community, the importance of environmental stewardship, and the enduring truth that home is worth fighting for. The woman who planted them as small saplings 17 years ago learned that she too could grow strong roots and weather any storm when her family's future was at stake.